a lot of people around the world are traveling hours and hours, being in traffic jams and all that, and just wasting their time just because they need to be at 9 o'clock in the office.
If you look at remote working compared to working in an office, I think the main thing is that you've got more options.
There's nothing wrong asking a 22-year-old when you're 45 saying, how do I set up Trello? What the hell is Slack? What's Zoom? And how do I make these happen, right? Full honesty, I think remote working is the future.
But because it's Britain, everyone cheered him on the fact that he did it.
Right.
And
well done, you participated, yeah.
There's a film about him. Came out a few years.
A film because he went last.
Yeah, but it's like he was quite a character.
Yeah.
And he didn't really fit in anywhere. And the Jamaican bobsleigh team.
Oh, I love that film.
That kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good film. You should check it out.
All right, enough about Eddie the Eagle. Welcome to Startup Dynamics, the podcast hosted by me, Jonas Urbonas, and I'm joined by Jack Gerard. And the reason we're doing this podcast is because we keep having conversations in the office about a variety of different things within the startup world. And we always have two different perspectives, one from a founder, myself, and then from you, Jack, as an employee.
Yeah.
And it kind of just started to make sense for us to go and say, right, let's just start recording these because we have some really, really interesting and good conversations quite a lot, like every single week.
Yeah.
So that's basically what we're doing. So Startup Dynamics is the dynamic between a founder's perspective and a employee's perspective on a variety of different issues or just things that involve startups. And the most recent thing we were talking about which is basically unavoidable, remote working, right?
Yeah.
And with the COVID and everything like that, right? And so just to kind of quickly start, what was your first experience when you were forced to work from home? Because you are the office guy. You love coming to the office, right?
Yeah.
What was your first experience? That was probably March or something like that, right?
Yeah.
When you basically were forced to work from home.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, the idea of working for me and the idea of going into an office are completely side by side.
Yeah.
So from March, having to work from home is completely different.
Yeah.
At first, I liked it, to be fair, but I liked it in the way that I treated it more as a holiday and a break, rather than, because at the time of lockdown, no one knew that it'd be such a long-term thing.
Yeah.
So at first I thought, it'll be working from home for a few weeks, and then we'll come back and everything will go back to normal. I think when I started to realize that it would be a month, 2 months, even like half a year, that's when I had to make changes, and it going from a temporary working from home into full-time remote working.
Yeah. And when you went through that transition, what was the biggest challenge? Because going from, it's a nice little holiday, I'll come back to the office, when you fully realized, right, this is now going to have to be my office for the foreseeable future, what were the biggest challenges at that time?
And the big thing for me, which I'd quite like to touch on a bit later too, but it's the mental side,
right.
And mentally getting prepared for the day. Yeah. So when you're going into an office every day, you can kind of, you wake up an hour before work, you get ready, you're already thinking about the day, and even your 20-minute commute into work, which for me is a walk into work, that you're getting ready for the day there, you're getting into the office, you're sitting down, and then you're ready to work. Whereas at home, at the time at home, you would be waking up 5 minutes before you had to start, logging on, you're half asleep, you've not had your morning coffee, and kind of that first half an hour of work, there's no productivity at all.
Yeah, it's just kind of, it puts you out of your routine. Like, I'm a very much routine type of person. Like you, I've got my morning breakfast, my morning workout, my morning coffee, my morning commute. And if I basically don't do these things, it throws me off my game just a bit, especially that I like to time block my day if I can. But also, I think, the mental side of things is interesting because we see some people really thrive working from home because kind of on the flip side, you have full control of your time, right? There's no, if I'm going to be late 5 minutes, for my 9 a.m. working start, I might get penalized and stuff like that, right?
I think that's from my point of view as an employer, and not only an employee, not only as an employee, but as an employee who's only been working for a year. So at the time of lockdown, I'd only ever worked in an office. So to go from that change of working in an office every day to remote working, it's a big change. But so from your point of view as a founder, I assume that you were more naturally suited to go into remote working full time?
Naturally suited is probably not the best way to describe it, solely because I think that really depends on your personality. As I said, I'm a person of habit, and I like to have kind of my boundaries, right? I think the one thing I really quickly realized when working from home is that the lines between when you're working and you're not completely got blurred, right? So even that little commute, like that half an hour walk where you can just, I don't know, listen to a podcast and just not think about anything else and just maybe be with your thoughts or whatever it may be, right? There was no real substitute for that. You kind of had to force yourself to do these things, like just go for a walk around your neighborhood or something like that, right? Or do some extra meditation or whatever, maybe just to disconnect yourself from the office work. Because if you look statistically, even like throughout this half a year, like the working hours have tremendously increased. Because as you say, like you wake up and you immediately go to work. There's no more this, even if you finish work at 5, especially the bigger companies, you'll get an email at 6, at 7, and like they'll know you're available because they know you're working from home. You've got everything set up. There's no excuses anymore, right? So I think it's really having these things in place of, which I actually had, right? So I start my work, for example, like 7:30, 8 o'clock, right? You just decide, right? This is when I start, right? I would change into my work clothes. I would not be in my pajamas. I would not be in my, leisure, clothing. Even though like this is pretty leisure, like it's still like this is how I go to work. So I would still dress up as if I would go to work. I would make my coffee, and the good thing is like we have a separate room that I could make into an office, right? So literally, I would tell my wife, my dog, and everybody around me saying, as soon as I close this door, I'm in my office. You don't touch me. If you need to connect with me, you call me, you text me. But you don't, like, this is it, right? It's exactly the same, right? And when I go to lunch, when my work day ends, that's when it ends, right? I change my clothes, I close the office door and I'm outside, right? And I think that really requires quite a lot of, like, I don't know, like mental strength and self-control to have those type of boundaries, right? I've heard stories where it's quite popular amongst developers to work remotely and from home. And it was a funny story where this developer that's like just shit-hot developer, right? Like I think he's like working for Twitter or something like that, like one of the lead devs there. What he does is he just has different slippers. So literally he's got a pair of slippers by his office door. He goes out of his at-home slippers to his work slippers, and that's his trigger. I'm now working, right?
I mean, it's funny, but I completely get that. And I think that is something we can completely agree on, which might be a rare thing. But so we're recording now on a Friday, so I know that when I finish the day, I'll leave the office, put my headphones on, and there'll be a playlist where on my walk home, it kind of changes me over into the weekend. And then I can go and enjoy, not think about work too much, that type of thing. So I'd agree with that in terms of when you're working remotely, you need that switch on and off that you can mentally put yourself in to get into that work like mind frame.
There's a reason people have work phones, right? Because you turn it off as soon as you go home and stuff like that, right? I think that's a really good thing to have. Like, if my wife does that, like she just goes airplane mode, like that's it, done, right? So I think that's really important. But just to kind of to reiterate, kind of from a founder's point of view, how I guess remote working affected us as a company from my perspective, right? was the fact that, you kind of lose control a bit. Because obviously when everybody's in the office, you have control of the vibe, of the kind of conversations you're having, just the emotion and just like decision making, everything. Like everything's very instant, right? Whereas with that, it was a bit of a shock because all of a sudden, even though half of our company is remote, and we're used to speaking with developers, for example, because they're mostly remote, right? We weren't used to doing that ourselves between the marketing and the design team, right? So that was a bit of a transition. How do you communicate, in such a way that doesn't take 2 hours, both of your time, and is still very clear? And I think in the beginning that was really a challenge because I hate the Zoom calls, right? Yeah. I don't understand when, I see companies try to replicate big meetings in their office with Zoom calls, and I have friends that are like, architects and like, finance people, whatever it be, and it's like, what have you been doing today? I'm like, well, it's my, 6 hours on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
It's like, that's just completely.
And during that time, you're on mute and you're hidden away, and you're probably off doing another thing anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So one good thing out of that, like with everything, it's how you adapt to it and what you learn from it, right? Yeah. What we as a team, I think, learned a lot from that is how to concisely communicate through something like Slack and kind of really like reiterate what you're doing and communicate with the team without having those meetings.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that we're now doing, right, is every single Monday, we do this reflective thing. We've got, is it like 5 questions, isn't it? Like we're doing like, what are your blockers? What did you feel was a success? Was a failure? And how is your next week looking? But this kind of not just like, this is what I've done bullet by bullet point, but like really going through it, really reflecting both on an emotional and a mental level.
Yeah.
Right. And what that does is, if you're doing that in a meeting, for example, right, what happens? Like you usually have like, 5 to 10 people, one person stands up, talks, right? And then everybody else goes like,
yeah.
Right? Whereas in here, you're in full control of your time. You've got these things on Slack or whatever you use, right? You can read it whenever you want to.
Yeah.
And you, as a person that writes it, if you actually put in the effort, you really have to think about your week. Like you really have to go, right, what did I actually do that week? How did that actually affect my decisions?
Yeah.
And then to put that in a few paragraphs, right? I think that's a skill that needs to be learned. Like this type of reflective copywriting and writing skill has to be a very important skill if you want to do remote work, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. So I think the point that we're making here is that before we start going into detail about remote working, we need to make clear that in order for remote working to work, things have to be done properly.
Yeah, exactly.
And from my point of view, as an employee of the company, I think we did quite well going into that remote working phase.
Yeah.
I think especially during lockdown, when around, I don't know about you, but around me, I saw my friends and family and the people that they worked for kind of completely shutting down, people being like, I have nothing to do now, I just have to sit at home all day. Whereas our company, we switched into that online remote working frame of mind quite easily because of how you mentioned
and that's
Slack
the thing, like it's about having systems in place.
Yeah.
We had a project management system that's online. We had Slack, for example, that was communication. We knew how to use Zoom. All of our content and everything was online on a server or like on something like Google Drive, or all of our calendars were synchronized online, right? So we had this advantage of being a new, young, tech-based company, right? But I see that being a big struggle and big barrier to the bigger companies that are doing kind of everything old school, right? Yeah. So I think that's something that I'm glad that people are learning, because let's face it, I think remote working is not going anywhere. And I do want to make that distinction between working from home and remote working, because there's two completely separate things. And what I see a lot, especially because of COVID, and when we spoke about it, I think you were the same. Like you thought that's what remote working is. It's just working from home, right? Yeah. Where in reality, remote working is like you work from wherever you want, right? You can be on the beach, in a park, in a coffee shop. It's wherever you feel you're the most productive and the most creative, and can do your work the best. So I think we really need to punch on that note, right? That it's not working from home, because that will ruin remote working. And when I'm saying remote working is not going anywhere, I'm speaking exactly about this kind of complete freedom of where you are when you do your work.
Yeah, definitely. I think because when we decided that we were going to film a podcast and our first topic would be working remotely, I think the main thing that I had to get out of my head was that lockdown is not remote working, and lockdown was such a tough time for everyone. So you have to get the feelings that you had in lockdown and kind of the hard times that lockdown brought. You've got to take that away from remote working, which I think we've cleared that up now. So should we go into more detail?
Yeah, so we knew we were going to be talking about this, so we made a bit of a pros and cons thing. So I'd be curious, to hear your perspective. Like, what do you feel are the pros of, are we doing remote working or are we doing work from home?
Remote working.
Let's do remote working.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you reckon the pros are if you were to do remote working? If I literally said, tomorrow we're going remote, like, what would make you happy about it?
I think the flexibility would be the main thing in terms of being able to work where you want to. I think we mentioned this right at the start, but I do like working in an office. But the one thing that sometimes can get to me is 5 days a week, every day of the year, coming and sitting in the same place, looking at the same wall, that kind of thing. So I do like the idea of remote working, where if you fancy working in a coffee shop one day, you can go there. If you fancy going to the library, if it's a sunny day, you can go and work outside, or you can go and work in your room. I think that's what I like about remote working. It's that flexibility and not being stuck in one place. And to be fair, our company is quite, I don't know, unique, but we do mix it up sometimes. We'll go out and film at a location. We'll do a podcast right now.
Yeah, that helps.
We've even talked before about kind of turning the office into an active office, and that helps. But generally, if you look at remote working compared to working in an office, I think the main thing is that you've got more options to work. What about you?
And so just to kind of piggyback on that, like, you see that as a pro, but I definitely see people that see that as a con, solely because a lot of people, like that I know, they really need that safe place, that direction, to know that, they like to see the same walls because that's their work environment.
But would you not argue that that's down to the individual?
It is.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, another person could say that that's a con, this type of flexibility, because it depends of, I like, for example, like, I don't know if I'd be good at remote working. Like, I could probably say that for me personally, that could be a con, because I'm quite easily distracted by things, right?
I agree with that.
So and I'm not even saying like the fridge or whatever, right? But I'll probably watch more educational YouTube videos on the side, right? I'll maybe go out for more walks or whatever. And these are like really positive things. But at the same time, it depends like what you measure. Like, if you measure productivity and the amount of work you do, I don't know. I have not done it for long enough, but I feel like the hours I would put in would be less.
Okay.
Not sure if they would be less productive because I would be doing other things, right? Just because I don't really have that, structured lifestyle as maybe some others might do.
Yeah.
But one big pro for me is probably, I don't know, I've got a couple, but just this type of, when you have those couple of hours or minutes off or anything like that, right? If you're in the office in the city, you go out and get a sandwich, or you go out and walk around cars or whatever it may be. Whereas there, at home, you can make a nice dinner, warm, fresh dinner that's healthy for you, that's good for you. You can be with your family. You can be with your dog, right? You can go and, I don't know, do something in the garden for 30 minutes, right? I think for me as a human being, that's a lot more attractive and I think would make me a bit happier than just going out for a walk in the city centre.
Yeah, and maybe that's where we differ, because I don't know if you want to mention it on here, but you're a dad now.
Very fresh dad, yeah.
So you obviously need to be home a lot more, and you need to have that flexibility of being able to work remotely. Whereas I'm 22, I live with my flatmate. I've not really got anyone that I need to look after or care for, so I can't afford to be in the office all day. But so for me that would be a pro, but not for me because of who I am, but for other people who maybe.
And I think again, like, there's two flip sides, because family time can definitely be a pro, but at the same time, like, you know, my wife will bother me a lot more. You know, especially I have a complete newborn that's a week old, right? That's definitely going to be a distraction. Like the fact that I can go to the office right now and just not think about, you know, what's going on there, like that's a blessing for me, because otherwise, like, it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
There's this crying. You always have to look over your shoulder and everything like that, right? So it depends where you are as well in that journey. So I completely understand, like, that for you as a young bloke still, like that's absolutely not a criteria.
But I think linking to that, my biggest con of working remotely would be mentally. For me, it's important that I come into an office and talk to people.
Yeah.
So even now, for example, we're trying to make it productive and have value, but just being able to have a one-on-one chat with anyone for an hour, for me mentally, it does me a lot of benefit to me.
But it does feel like you're talking about the COVID type of remote working. But am I or not?
Well, I don't know, because I've never worked remotely without COVID.
Yeah.
But would you say that if you work remotely full time, would you still be able to go and chat to people during the day?
I think so, because again, like, what remote working means is that yes, you can work in an office if you want to.
Yeah.
Just go to a co-working space.
Yeah.
Just go again to a coffee shop or something like that, right? There's a lot of people that are with their laptops and just like traveling around, right?
Yeah.
And you can strike up a conversation with literally anybody, right?
Yeah, but if I was in a coffee shop and some random guy came up to me and started a conversation, I'd be, you know what I mean? I'd be a bit worried. Whereas when you're in an office, you have got that team ethic, and you do want to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And then even kind of going out for a drink after work and stuff like that. That's what I feel I'd miss from remote working. Because as a young person who's just started out in the career, the thing that I'm looking for in work is kind of making those connections with people.
And I would imagine it's a bit harder to learn as well, because when you're surrounded with other people that are a bit more experienced, you can just always pick their brains. You can, you can learn from them by just watching what's going on and stuff like that. Whereas at home, it's just you and YouTube tutorials.
But I can see why that won't be a big problem for you as a founder who has a family and can go home to their family every day. But for me, I think being a part of a team in an office is a big part of it for me. And even along with that, being able to walk in and out of the office every day and walk past people down the street. But like we've said before, you can do that working remotely. You just have to put a bit more.
Yeah, you just have to make yourself do those things. It has to be part of your routine. Yeah. But to your point, really, like, that's probably one of my biggest cons, is that without people being in the office quite consistently, it's, at the moment, at least for me, as a fairly young founder still, building a culture is very hard, right? Because I always feel like, and it's somewhat my responsibility, but at the end of the day, it's the people that create the culture kind of naturally, especially in the beginning. And then you kind of, once you grow, you have to instill the initial culture onto those people, right?
Yeah.
So I think, obviously, recruitment is a big key to what your culture is going to be. But, transferring the culture that we've got, which is a lot, about communication, about doing, creative things and stuff like that. It's very hard when you're just sitting at home and writing on Slack, right? And I'm like really still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to work out how would that work if we were completely a remote company, because that's not out of the question, As I said, half of our company is already remote. There's a lot of benefits to being remote, but I think the culture side of things and the unmeasurable face-to-face contact, smell, even like just and all the chemicals that go around when you're just around a physical person, right? You can't really measure that, but you can't really replicate that as well remotely. So that's a big con for me, because I feel like skills can be learned when you build a team, but it's the dedicated culture where everybody's in the same mission and then in the same mindset, and literally just it feels like one. That's what really helps get a young startup through those tough times and get like to that promised land a bit quicker. So yeah, that's something that I'd be curious, even like if somebody's like listening out there to our very first episode, hit me up. Like if you've got any suggestions how to build a culture remotely, I'd love to hear it, because that's still something I'm trying to figure out.
And that kind of links to a question I wanted to ask you as the founder.
Yeah.
Like, working remotely, do you feel like your employees have a wall to hide behind, or kind of a safety blanket where if we're in an office, you could go, what are you working on now? Or can you talk me through this? Whereas working remotely, you can you have those 10 minutes to kind of prepare yourself, that kind of thing.
Right. That's, again, it comes down to how good are you at hiring the right people.
Yeah.
Now, I absolutely despise micromanaging, right? And that obviously had to be learned, because when I first started out, like 5 years ago, like it was weird. Like nobody can do it better than me.
Yeah.
Right? It's my baby. It doesn't matter if it's copywriting or design or whatever it may be. Like, if I'm not touching that, like it's not going to get done properly, right? Yeah. But throughout the years, what I realized is that you really have to trust the people that they'll do a great job, right? And once I started really kind of trusting and delegating, not only like tasks, but like whole areas, like, take care of social, take care of marketing, take care of advertising, whatever it may be, right? Then it becomes a thing of you're pleasantly surprised and you're kind of proud of your employees when they come back to you something that you maybe weren't expecting, right? So that didn't really affect me, because I just, at the moment, I have full trust in everybody. And I think, that was through a lot of test and trial. There were a few times where obviously I had to fire people just because they weren't a cultural fit, and I couldn't see through that in an interview and stuff like that. But I think we reached the point where the core team is really good, where I can, leave you guys for a month, come back and be absolutely confident that we're still afloat, and we're still doing good, and maybe you made some great decisions that I would never thought about. So that definitely was not an issue. Saying that, it helps if we're a small connected team.
Yeah.
So we're all responsible for a certain area within the business. So if like one area of the business starts completely failing, there's nowhere really to hide, because you're the only one responsible for it mostly. So I understand it might be an issue for more established and bigger companies, but from my point of view, it definitely wasn't an issue.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think if we take it back to the Zoom call of remote working, when we've got 5 people in a Zoom call, you can't go on mute and hide your screen and go and do the washing up.
And it's just being human. Like you said, like the first few weeks, you kind of laid back, you were around your parents, you got the food, you got to reminisce about things. And as a founder, like, I have to realize that that's going to happen. Like, I need to understand that that's a completely human, normal thing to do. So I'm not going to penalize you because you chilled out for a bit in this massive uncertainty, right? And you try to figure out things. So I think that's a big thing. And I'd be curious from your perspective, did you feel that pressure that, oh shit, like I'm working from home now, I need to really be productive and produce something because like I'm under a magnifying glass?
I wouldn't say it made any difference from working in an office to working remotely, but what I would say is that working for a startup, you have this kind of responsibility, which I'd say I thrive under, of, okay, I am 1/5 of the team.
Yeah.
There's a lot of responsibility here. I need to work as hard as I can in order to help the company do well. When I was going to job interviews, there was a point I made all the time, which I kind of liked. That was, I'd rather be kind of a big member of a small team than a small cog in a huge machine.
Yeah.
Because if I went and worked for a company with 500 employees, I was 1/500th, if not less, of that company doing well.
There is something about when you make a decision or you produce some piece of work and you see an immediate effect in the business and it going forward, right? And I was reading up on some, what like psychological studies and articles relating to what brings employees happiness, right? What are like the most, I guess, mostly seen and kind of the biggest patterns of what brings happiness, right? And if you take away like, the money, safety, all those things, right? The number one thing is essentially ownership and accountability of the work that you produce. Which it was a bit surprising for me because I thought like money literally going to be the first one or safety or something like that, or like the team around them, which is quite close as well, the team. But this accountability and ownership of whatever you do and seeing that it makes an impact only shows that every single person wants, you put in time into something, right? So you want to see that it's not for nothing. And that made absolute sense to me. And again, when you talk about delegating tasks and really trusting others, what I've noticed throughout the years is like the more trust and the more responsibilities I give to somebody, they start to thrive, even though they did not ask for it, right? And if you went thriving on that, if you went excited about the fact that you're getting more responsibility and doing more things, then I would actually question, not necessarily are you a good employee or stuff like that, but are you actually doing what you love? Because if you did, you'd be effing excited, right? So when you combine the things, so like when you realize what you're really passionate about, not necessarily good at, but passionate about, what's your goal, what you want to become in the next couple of years and stuff like that, if I can give you as much work and responsibility in those areas, apparently the happier you'll be. Is that true? Like, is that how you feel?
Yeah, from an employee, from me anyway. When I joined, the idea of being the fifth employee of a company, I'm never going to get that opportunity again. And if you look at, say, who the fifth employee of Facebook, the fifth employee of Uber, who they were and where they are now, that is really exciting. And of course, if that's the mindset you have, then you are going to work harder. You're not going to clock off at 4:59, kind of, you've already logged off, you packed away, ready to go. You are going to kind of, when needed, come in at the weekend and work, come in half an hour early, work half an hour later, put in the extra mile, because that input is going to directly affect the startup compared to if you are in a huge company, that half an hour, it's going to be a tiny percentage of the company doing well. But
I do want to ask you something though.
Yeah, go on.
So, I will bring it back to remote working, right? Well, maybe even more particular working from home, because now you've experienced that. We did that for 4 months, maybe even half a year. I lost count, really, to be honest with you. But through that, what would you, from an employee's perspective, point out or recommend somebody that's also an employee but maybe struggling working from home? What could be like the actionable items that they could take to make their life a bit easier and become a better remote employee?
Get a good playlist.
Yeah.
No,
I get that. Yeah.
I think it's just communication. When we're sat next to each other in the office, I can literally say, Jonas, what can you help me out with this?
Yeah.
Or can we go through the plan of the day? Whereas when you're completely on your own and you're not sure of what to do, you do have that ability or that ability to just hide and think, okay, I'll leave it, I'll not bother. So I think that incentive to communicate with the rest of your team, even when you're working remotely, that's hugely important. And making sure you're all on the same page. I think that's the main thing for me. And like, if you're struggling for motivation working remotely, that's probably more down to do with the actual job rather than actually working from home. Yeah. I know that we've mentioned it, but lockdown was a hard time, and it was kind of, you had mental baggage that went along with working from home. But I think that if you're struggling to find motivation after half a year, then you're in the wrong job. It's nothing to do with working remotely.
I mean, it could be that you might need to throw in a couple of things in there throughout your day to kind of distract you from your work as well. Because, like, let's face it, I love what I do, but there are times I'm demotivated. And sometimes all it takes is I go and shoot some basketball, play a video game or something like that, or just go for a walk just to clear your mind a bit.
So one thing I've learned from you is allocating time periods for each day. So having an hour working on building social media, then an hour on researching, an hour on this, an hour on that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you know you have to do 5 things and you say, I've got to do this in a day, it's a lot less manageable. So I'd say learning from you that you have to put things into time slots and manage your day through that. I think that'd help a lot.
Yeah. And you can try and do those things, allocate those things that are very different as well. Yeah. Like, I imagine, like, you do, let's say, video editing for 2 hours, and then you do something like some just pure writing in the next 2 hours. It's, quite different creative fields. And I guess from what we spoke about earlier, it's the final thing for an employee, and what I've seen is just having that, forcing yourself into a routine, I would imagine. Not, trying to really have distinctive separation between your office hours and your working hours.
Yeah.
From a founder's perspective, I think when it comes to managing your team remotely and actually getting everybody together and motivated and stuff like that, I think it can be challenging for sure, especially if it's the first time you're doing it, and especially if you're not a young tech startup, right? It's very important to have systems in place. If you don't know, ask. There's nothing wrong asking a 22-year-old when you're 45 saying, how do I set up Trello? Yeah. What the hell is Slack? What's Zoom? And how do I make these happen, right? If you go over that ego barrier, I guess, and put systems in place. And by systems, it's not only platforms, but also how you use those platforms. So saying Zoom calls are only at these particular instances, right? So for example, if there's definitely something we cannot communicate through Slack, through written word, let's allocate, say, 30 minutes. You have a timestamp that we you have to be really prepared and concise in that call to have that Zoom call and carry on. Putting stuff in place like we did where, we never did this reflective each week write down. We did Monday stand-ups, we did video calls, or we did in the office, like, this is what I've done, sat down and talked, which would go on for a couple of hours, right? Sometimes needed, but not every week. And so making those type of decisions and solutions is very important. And then just finding different, I guess, creative ways to connect your people. So if we take away COVID, if we say you can go out, you can socialize and stuff like that, but you're a company that wants to stay remote after this, for example, right? I do think it's important to still have some way to get everybody together. Maybe it's maybe just go to a pub on a Friday as a team. Yeah. Maybe you go on a trip to Italy for a week or something like that, right? Depending like what your company is and what your means are. Maybe you just send out some like nice little treats to everybody at home, just to make sure that you're thinking about them and they're not alone. Maybe it can be just like a handwritten note, but those things matter.
Yeah.
So I think like just trying to really keep personal and try to keep that culture going despite being kind of disconnected, I think is quite important as well.
Yeah.
So that would be, I guess, from my side. I think we covered quite a lot. The one last thing I do want to touch on is, what do you, from your perspective, see is the future after this for remote working, not working from home, remote working? Where do you see that going? And I'll give my 2 cents on that afterwards.
Yeah. Well, you touched on it there when you said about a 45-year-old man asking the 22-year-old for advice on setting up the Zoom call or whatever. And I think what I've seen, because I'm still kind of connected to the uni scene, having graduated a year and a half ago, I think uni and colleges and schools are being geared up now to fit into that remote working atmosphere. My experience of working, of going to uni, a lot of that was kind of remote working, in that officially I had to come into uni for 9 hours a week to the lectures and seminars, but for the rest of the time it was up to me to learn in whatever way I wanted. So whether that'd be going to the library or working from home or going to the coffee shop. And I think so the future generations coming through uni, I think they're more geared to remote working.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the people that are 40, 50, they don't know how to use Zoom. It'll take them 2 days to set up the Wi-Fi on the work laptop that they've been given. I think those people will start to retire, and those people being my mum and dad, uncles and aunties, they'll retire, and this new generation of kind of remote workers will come through. And I think we've seen in the lockdown that you can work remotely, and it doesn't affect too much, or it didn't affect our company too much, the productivity, and it actually benefited us in a way. I think that's my point of view. And as someone who has only been working for a year, and half of that year has been working remotely, half has been in an office, I think people are more than capable of making that change.
Yeah.
Whereas 20 years ago, there was the traditional view of, 9 to 5, but that traditional view of working in an office and that being every single job. Yeah. What about you?
So I think I guess I'll touch it from a kind of company and business perspective where I see it's going. Full honesty, I think remote working is the future. I think where we are going is really doubling down on you as an individual, what you can provide, what is your skill set. I think there's going to be a massive increase in freelancers. I think there's going to be a massive increase in like small little businesses and stuff like that, especially like with e-commerce coming out and stuff like that. I think companies are going to be a lot more adapted to remote working. They'll use that as a recruitment tool. You can look at something like Twitter, where they said, we are okay with being remote for life if you want to.
Yeah.
And I think that goes both ways. So it gives control to an employee, which I think again comes back to this accountability, responsibility side of things. But let's face it, for businesses, you're avoiding paying for massive buildings and that are there for the sole purpose of you going and being in different four walls. A lot of times, you've got a 500 people office, but then at the end of the day, you're just surrounded by, I don't know, those 5 to 10 people that are within your little area of, say, marketing for a specific thing. So you don't really feel that, but the expenditure and other effects of those type of buildings, I think they can be used for a better thing than just offices. And I think what companies are going to be doing more is separating those little teams and spreading them out throughout cities and the world, actually, right? So I think co-working spaces are not going anywhere. I'm already seeing, the big offices closing down and just sending the smaller teams to co-working spaces. So say your marketing team is renting out a literal office space in WeWork or whatever it may be. One's in London, one's in Manchester, one's in New York, and one's in Germany or whatever it may be, right? Just because, that's the best location for them.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a lot more flexible to what you can do and how your business is growing as well. And then I think at the end of the day, it comes down to employee happiness, right? So remote work, and once you crack it, and I think, Orfi Active, our company, if you don't know, our startup, is gonna get there at some point, just because the fact that you're not restricted to your geolocation for talent, for example, is a big sell for me as a founder, because now I can look at the whole world of like, right, what's the best fit in the whole world for our company, rather than just down the street because it's easier to commute. And then the final thing is, yes, we're quite lucky. We live near the city center. We can walk. A lot of people around the world are traveling hours and hours, being in traffic jams and all that, and just wasting their time just because they need to be at 9 o'clock in the office for no other reason, just because that's the way we're used to doing things, right? So that's my long-winded way of saying that remote working is not going anywhere, but that does not necessarily mean working from home, because now if you tell a big company I'm going to be working from home, they'll see as that as I'm taking a day off, and that's definitely going to be changing.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it'll be a rare occasion on the podcast going forward, but I think so we can agree that the founder and the employee both think that remote working is the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think that's pretty much it for the first episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and if you didn't, let us know. We're still learning. This is our first at-bat to doing this. We're going to do quite a few of these. We're also going to have other startup founders as guests coming on here to give their take on different things. Subscribe to us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. We're basically everywhere. You can search for Orfi Active, or you can search for my name. I'm the host, Jonas Urbonas. And we'll see you in the next episode.